Hello everyone, Ron here from L.T.L Tutoring Central, and if you're looking for tips and strategies to help with your learning, you are in the right place. Revision. What is revision? And how should you use it? Now, a lot of people think of revising or revision as proofreading and editing, and it can certainly include those components where you're reading through your work and you're checking for mistakes in terms of grammar and punctuation. So that can be a part of revision, but it isn't the whole story. When you're revising, you want to look at your entire paper, whether that's a fiction story, a novel, whether you're writing a research report, an essay, a paragraph, whatever you're writing, revision can be very, very important because you want to look for things like unity. In other words, does your article hold together? Does everything within your article belong? And if it doesn't, it needs to be either eliminated or it needs to be restructured so that it fits in with your entire paper. So revision is not so much looking line by line and looking for all the mistakes as it is looking at the whole picture. You also want to have coherence, and you will have heard me talk about these items in other arenas, in other videos or other blogs, but these are all part of revision. So unity, does everything belong together? Coherence, in other words, is it understandable? And you have to ask yourself not just is it understandable to you, but you have to ask is it understandable to the reader, to the audience? And often you're handing something in to your teacher and you assume that the teacher knows a lot about the topic that you're writing about, but you shouldn't assume too much. Even if the teacher has read the novel, even if the teacher has been teaching a particular subject, you still want your paper to be able to stand on its own. In other words, almost anyone should be able to read your article, your paper, your book, and understand what you're saying without having to be an expert in the field. Unless, of course, you're in an advanced course and you're writing about some esoteric research paper, then of course you can assume a certain level of understanding. That will vary depending again on what you're writing, and that's a part of revision. You have to think about your audience, but you also think about the subject and the context in which you're writing. And that leads me to my next point, which is intent. What is your intent of the article that you're writing? Is it meant to inform? Is it meant to entertain? Is it meant to persuade? It might be a combination of a number of different intentions, but if you know what you're trying to do, if you have that intention in your mind during the revision process, you ask yourself, or you look to see, have you reached that goal? Have you managed to persuade? Have you managed to entertain? Have you managed to inform or provide a suitable and adequate explanation if that's the goal of that particular paper? So knowing your intent is very important. Now, how do you reach that? How do you manage to get all of these things together? During the revision process, you might need to elaborate. Now, what I'm going to say in the next few sentences might seem contradictory, but it isn't really. Sometimes you need to elaborate. In other words, you read through and you realize it's clear in your mind, but it isn't necessarily clear on paper or on the computer screen to another reader. Again, you're thinking of your audience, you're thinking of your reader, or if you're doing a presentation, of course, you're literally thinking of your audience, your listener, or if you're doing a podcast, also your listener. So you might need more explanation, maybe another quotation, or maybe an expansion of that quotation, or a better expansion, a more complete expansion of that quotation, or some other piece of information, perhaps an anecdote or an example that would elaborate and give a clearer picture so that your audience can understand what you're saying. We're going back, of course, to coherence. Having said that, sometimes you have to cut. Sometimes you have to take things out. So you may need to add some things in, you may need to take some things out. So for cutting, you're looking at things like repetitive words, repetitive sentences. Are you saying the same thing over and over and over again, and not even in a new way or not even with new explanations? those need to be reduced. Some of them will need to be eliminated, perhaps. Have you used a lot of padded language? I did a video and I think a blog too a long time ago now about padded language where you're adding in a lot of extra words. Sometimes it just happens automatically. Often it happens automatically because we write as we think and or as we speak. And often when we're speaking, there's a lot of extra verbiage in there. So you want to eliminate most of that as you go through and revise your paper because you don't want a lot of words that are unnecessary. When you take them out, your sentences become more concise, they become more powerful, and your message is generally clearer. It can get muddled with a lot of extra unnecessary words. The other thing is use the active voice when you're writing sentences. The active voice is when the subject is doing the action, not receiving the action. So passive sentences are fine. It's not as if you have to eliminate all passive sentences or that they don't have their place. They do. Again, I've done videos on active and passive sentences. You can check out here if you're watching on YouTube, or you can check out the blog as well. I'll put links below. But the active voice is the best one to have the majority of your sentences so that you have a stronger article. It will become more coherent, and it also helps to unify it. So remember, we were talking earlier about unity and coherence. All of these things tie together if you're revising in the right word and the right way, speaking about words. You might need to reword some of your sentences. You can look to see, do you have good verbs and adjectives and adverbs in particular. The adjectives and adverbs are modifiers or describing words. And if you're using ones that are overworked or overused, boring words, to be honest. So, for example, walked. She walked into the store. Walked is a bit boring. So you can often come up with a much better verb. You can also think of better adjectives and adverbs. You can use a thesaurus to do this, but you need to be careful when you use a thesaurus because not all synonyms are created equally. So they're not all interchangeable. So you do have to be a little bit careful with the connotation of the word, so the more subtle meaning of the word. So when you look up walked, there'll be a lot of synonyms, for example, or if you look up run, there'll be a lot of synonyms, but they won't all fit depending on whether you're talking about a person, a deer, some other animal or creature. So some will fit and some won't. Snakes slither, but they don't really prance. So you have to be careful with any synonyms that come up, and just check the connotation. Maybe if you're a little bit unsure, try to check and find some other sentences that have used the word, and then you can probably see whether that fits for you. So there's the opportunity to reword some of your sentences. Again, always with the aim to be clearer and more interesting. You want the reader to be interested in your writing. So that's my few words about revision. It's the idea of taking your whole paper, whether that's a novel, a book report, a speech, an essay, it doesn't matter what it is, and looking at some of these components to see, have you attained the goals that you set out to do? Don't let this scare you away. I know it sounds like a lot, but once you practice for a while, it becomes sort of second nature. You have to force yourself a little bit because the fact is you have the thoughts in your head. You have to make sure that it came out on paper or on the computer screen. In other words, in your writing, because sometimes it doesn't translate. It doesn't transfer over to the page. So you need to make sure that it actually does that in a way that the reader will fully understand what you're saying. So it does take a bit of effort, and it takes a bit of stepping outside of yourself. Of course, you can have other people read your paper before you hand it in or before you publish it and see, receive their comments, and you can ask them a few questions too and see if they're able to answer them. And if they are, you've probably managed what you'd want. And if they're not really able to, maybe it needs to be clarified. Maybe you need to go back and revise a little bit. So, but don't let it get you bogged down. Have fun with it. Enjoy the writing process. It can be It can be a drudge, but it can also be very enjoyable, especially if you always keep in mind your intent and the final goal. Sometimes the little bits in between can be a lot of work, but if you keep your intent and your final goal in mind, I think you'll enjoy it much more. I will put a link below to the website and to the blog, and a couple of links for my books. So if you're interested in reading the books, if you have Kindle Unlimited, that's free. Otherwise, it's a low fee to buy a paperback copy or an electronic version. I almost forgot what I was going to say there. I don't do edits on my videos, you might have noticed. So if I make a mistake, you're going to see my mistake. We all make mistakes and we learn from them, hopefully. It is tricky sometimes to get through a whole video without stumbling on something. It's Ron Johnson from L.T.L Tutoring Central. Keep learning and keep having fun. Until next time. Bye-bye for now.